one screw here. These screws are black countersunk head screws. That'll be the easy one. There's one here underneath the remains of that glue and so forth, somewhere about here. Scrape that back. There it is. That one came out without a fight. It's not uncommon to have a bit of, for them to give a bit of grief. I'll collapse that front down. There are two screws in the film cassette well, here and here. Now, that one came loose without a fight. It only leaves one, and that did too. Okay, I have to say this is a non-typical Retina IIa. Our struts will now lift out. These I'll have to clean and check carefully to make sure that straight bits are straight and bent bits are bent in the correct fashion. Here's that cocking shaft. That's held in place with this bracket. At the bottom of the camera, in the same relative position, this spacer, this little washer spacer, serves the same purpose. And there's the return spring for the shutter release, which I'll put carefully to one side. That's our camera body, stripped down, and I'm just checking to make sure that there's no sign of the glue holding the bellows having given up the ghost, and there isn't. It's just like new, and the bellows are nice and supple, and you can see they're nice shiny black leather there. That this is in very good condition, this camera. Okay, that's our camera body. We'll pop that to one side. These pieces I've got to put in the ultrasonic cleaner, and I'll start cleaning up everything else. Well, while the ultrasonic cleaner is working its magic on those parts, we'll start on the shutter. This is the shims. We've got two paper shims and a metal shim there. They're quite dry. Quite often they're very, very oily. They're not. Pop them to one side. And the lenses. And screwing the front grip. These should be finger tight. Occasionally you'll need a rubber glove or something to let you get a better grip. That front one, it's a little bit hazy. It's pretty good. You'll probably know, this is just a trim ring, this one, at the front. It sits down in the recess here. It doesn't set the height of the lens at all. The rear element here, the rear group, that's quite a bit more hazy. Hopefully that's just sponge on the outside surface that will clean away easily. It's difficult to say at this stage. The innermost surface doesn't look good, and I see a tiny star, a sparkly star in there. Well, that is definitely a sparkly star, is like a little asterisk. That's separation in the balsam layer. Of course I can do nothing about that. So I'll put the lenses to one side. Here is our shutter. This is a synchro contour shutter. These synchro contour shutters, this generation, basically they were contour rapid shutters with the addition of a flash sync mechanism to allow you to have X sync and M sync. So it was suitable for electronic flash or bulb flash. Right, I'll start on this. first task is to rotate that lock screw there. Now what I've got here is a screwdriver, a nice cheap screwdriver, and I've ground away the tip to leave two little points to engage those holes there. So if I can rotate that lock, and then turn this anti-clockwise to disengage the bayonet, it should lift off. There we go. It's our front piece. Under that we have this. This is the shutter speeds settings cam. Now we're into the works properly here. I'm going to unhook this little spring from the arm. And this spring, I'm going to flip that off its post, and that should allow me to lift this piece off. This piece is referred to as the main lever. And you can see this is quite well greased up with graphite grease, probably over greased up. That's quite normal. The shutter release button should come off with a bit of a wriggle. Yep. The spring on this is a very odd shape. Don't be tempted to square it up to make it look like how you think it should look. You're probably wrong, and it won't work. Okay, so this catch here, that's our B lever. That has a little return spring on it here. See if I can unhook that and remove the screw from the B lever. The spring normally stays attached to that screw. There's a groove around the screw. In that case they've come apart, but that's no problem. Here's the B lever. This is our flash sync speed settings lever. There's a detent spring there. Plain screw at the other end. Now I'm going to flick the spring off this post here to release the tension, and this cover should lift off. It fits over two separate posts, so it's often reluctant to move. Now that piece is separated. I'll show you how to put that back later. There's two brass spacers. That spring I'd unhooked from the lever. This little catch. Here's the pallets. And now here, this is our flash contact. Oh, it's the lever for the flash contact and the flash contact. They're held together and there's a single screw there. This is the high speed spring. This gives us our 500th of a second speed. Here's the wheel that works the flash contact. Now we're getting deeper into it. That is just about as far as I can go without taking the case off here. So the next trick is to remove the case in the back of the shutter. There are two screws. One's got a large flange on it. That screw locates the shutter in the mount to stop the shutter from rotating. And there's another little very short countersunk head screw there. The third hole here in this plate goes to nowhere. There's nothing there. Now I'm sliding this cover off gently because the wire is still connected for the flash. That was just the curved cocking rack that I've collected there. There's a small screw here. I'm going to back that up a couple of turns, and I should be able to lift that wire out of the contact. It doesn't want to come. Okay, I'll take that black screw out completely. Be careful not to lose that, it's very small. And have another go at that wire. There we go, I've got that out. Now there'll be a tiny black plastic insulating slug in there between the screw and the wire. You've got to be careful to recover it if at all possible. Otherwise your flash won't work. Now that's just the detent for our aperture settings. I'm just going to slacken these 3 screws slightly. These hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. There's a single screw here that holds our flash contact in position. And the flash contact may or may not wriggle out of the mount. It's not today. I'm just going to gently push on that. Yeah, it's coming. This is, the flash contact is a styrene plastic of some sort. It's very, very brittle. It's usually cracked up, and don't get solvent anywhere near it. And that's just the earth contact from the bottom of this, and you can see that black plastic insulator sitting there. It's in place. So I'll leave that all there together. Now I can separate the shutter case from the mechanism plate. There are 3 screws at the back. We've already got these ones loose. And the screws are identical, so you don't need to note which one came from which hole. Now I should be able to separate the case from the mechanism plate. So there we have our mechanism plate with the shutter blades, our case with the diaphragm mechanism. The diaphragm mechanism here works quite smoothly. We'll start here. If I turn this to expose these screw heads, those screw heads go through, and you can see the tail of them there. They hold the settings lever in place. So supporting this on the edge of the wooden block, so that as I press down on it I'm not bending things, I can back that screw out. The same on the other side. And the setting lever will drop away from the back, and pop that to one side. Tip that upside down and recover those 2 screws. Now they've got quite a pronounced shoulder around those screws. Here we have the retainer plate that holds the diaphragm blades in place. So there's 3 small screws. 2 of them are identical. The other one is a countersunk head screw, and it's not hard to tell where it fits because there's only one countersink. If I tip that lot out, here's our case. There's nothing left in that. It needs to be cleaned. There's the moving disc. That's the piece that is connected to the settings lever and swings the blades inwards and outwards. we have a nice neat rosette of diaphragm blades which will need to be cleaned, and the retainer plate likewise will need to be cleaned, and our 3 screws that hold it together. For the mechanism plate, we have 5 shutter blades, and they're a bit sticky. There's oil on those blades, it causes them to stick together. That's a problem that is always much worse in cold weather than hot weather. So you may have a camera that works fine in the summer, but it won't work in the winter. Right, start taking this to bits. Not much comes off. Unhook that spring. Remove this screw. Just checking to see if there's a washer under that. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. No washer, that's good. This lever swings the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. The blade actuating ring swings our shutter blades inwards or outwards. There are 4 screws hold this retainer plate in place. 3 of them are the same length. Short, 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 and 1 long one at this point. I'm keeping an awful lot of downward pressure on the screwdriver here. These screws are Loctited in place frequently. They're not enthusiastic to come loose. That was the longest screw, and there's the 3 small screws. And you don't want to damage the heads of those screws, because if it raises a burr it may catch on the shutter blades. So there's the retainer plate, and here is the blade actuating ring, and here's the shutter body, or the mechanism plate stripped down. I don't typically take the retard gear train off unless it's got obvious problems. I will flush this all with naphtha in place, and the reason I do that is it's a real bugger getting your adjustments right. If it worked well previously, when the camera was either assembled or last serviced, with the retard gear train in that position adjusted accordingly, then there's 99 times out of 100, once it's clean again and lubricated again, it'll work exactly the same. That's moving fairly good. It'll move freer than that when I'm finished cleaning it. So that's the shutter stripped down. I'll start cleaning up the mechanism plate. So I'm just swabbing this with naphtha, which is cigarette lighter fluid, Roncinol, that sort of thing. And around the inside of this groove here, that's where the blade actuating ring will run. Oh, this is shredding up. That's not a good example. I'm just making sure that there's no old grease and oil and dirt there. There's an interesting scratch visible right across here. Now those surfaces aren't even at the same height, so I'm not sure how someone achieved that. I'll just wipe around the inside of the lens tube. This is coming off quite clean. And the top surface of the mechanism plate, I want that nice and clean. And again, that's pretty good. Around the lens tube, there's a lot of grease there. Now some of that is old dry grease. Now I've got to be careful not to make a mess of that spring. Let's tuck that down out of the way. Now this grease will have just dried out and it's gathered up dust and dirt. It won't be lubricating very well. Now with the speed train, there's a hairspring. It returns the mechanism here. Now if that's sticking out, it's easily damaged, but if I'm holding back the pallets at this end with my finger. If I swing this arm across, release the pallets, that hairspring is now wound up. Because it's wound up, it's out of harm's way. Because it's out of harm's way, I can wipe my cotton bud around that part of the lens tube to remove that old grease without damaging that hairspring. As soon as you lift the pallet lever at this end, of course it all unwinds. You can see the hairspring there again. Okay, so I'm quite happy that that's quite clean. I'll want to flush this speed train, the retard gear train, and I'll do that with Naphtha. Now this speed train already works quite well, but it's not as free as it probably should be. So I'm just pour a bit of Naphtha onto that speed train, holding back the pallets at this end. Just work that lever backwards and forwards multiple times. Another flush of Naphtha. Do the same again. And another time for good luck. And I want to blow all that Naphtha out, because we don't want to leave it to evaporate, because that'll just leave all the rubbish behind. Most important that we blow away the Naphtha so it carries with it any oil, dust, dirt or other nuisances that we would like to be out of the shutter instead of in it. Okay, so let's see how that goes now. Well, that action is much more snappy, and that's exactly as I'd expect it to be. So that's basically that part's done. I need to clean up the components that go into it, of course, which are our blade actuating ring and this retainer. So I'll swab them down. There's not much showing on this blade actuating ring in the way of lubrication. A little bit dirty. Not much at all. And the retainer need to clean these surfaces up. This side in particular, this faces the shutter blades, and that needs to be nice and clean. Those marks that are present on there, if I angle that to the light, you can probably see there's marks on that surface. That's fingerprints. That's because somebody's picked it up between thumb and finger, and their skin oils or perspiration or whatever has just etched those fingerprints into the metal surface. Now that is visually unappealing. It might not make much difference to the way it works. If the surface is quite rough, because that's basically corrosion, those marks, then the shutter blades won't swing across them as freely as they otherwise might. You can tell whether it's rough by the feel when you're wiping one of the cotton buds across those surfaces. You can feel a distinct difference between smooth and shiny places and places that look a little bit rough. In this case, I'm certainly feeling it. This part here where it's quite dark, that is quite rough. I'm going to clean that. I'm going to rub that with a bit of metal polish and remove that tarnish, which will probably remove the silver, that pewter grey finish as well, but at least it'll move smoothly. Yeah, this is just a bit of brasso metal polish. Now I've got this sitting on a block of wood to keep it nice and flat. As you start to polish, you can actually hear a change as the polishing action proceeds, and it goes from quite a raspy sound to it just goes very quiet. And you know at that stage that yes, you've successfully taken the lumps and bumps off. You're probably never going to get a perfect result because you're working around all these little rivets and pins, so that you don't get a clean sweep with your polishing process. And that edge there, that was the worst part. Alright, I'll now clean that again with Naphtha and see what sort of a result I've got. You have to make sure you remove all traces of the polish, of course, because it probably contains waxes and other rubbish which will cause you grief, but it also is abrasive and you don't want leftover abrasives in your shutter. That looks very good. It's certainly a marked improvement over what I had. Now when I run the cotton bud over it, there's no noise. The surface is very smooth. This face faces our blade actuating ring. That's by no means as sensitive to things of this nature. I'm just checking to make sure that that pallet wheel spins freely. It certainly appears to. That's all good. So that can go back together. So the blade actuating ring. Now you can lubricate this with a wipe of molybdenum paste, and sometimes I would choose to do that. You can lubricate it with graphite powder, and that's probably what I'm doing today. It only fits in one position. Our retaining ring goes on. There's a locating stud for the retaining ring which drops into, there it is there, and it drops into a little notch in the mechanism plate. And of course we have our 4 retaining screws. 3 short ones and 1 long one. So I'll see if I can get them all in the right place. Put the screws in, don't do them up tight until they're all in position. Here's our 3 shorties. And the long one goes here. Alright, they're all in place, so I can tighten them up. Just as with undoing them, I'm keeping a lot of downward pressure on that screwdriver to make sure the screwdriver doesn't cam out. And I'll do those screws up firmly. Our blade actuating ring, moves nice and freely. That needs to be lubricated with graphite powder, which of course I'm about to do. Now the lever at the top, that swings the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. I'm going to clean that. It's pretty clean, but there's a bit of grease there on it. Where you've got a broad flat surface like this, running on a smooth surface like that, oils and grease tends to stick those things together, and you do not want them stuck together. You want things to move absolutely freely. And basically it creates like a vacuum basically, and things just do not want to move smoothly if there's any contamination or excess grease under there. I'm just going to lubricate that with a touch of molybdenum paste.